I'm one of those thousands who read the BFD pages. It's the only area really. See, there's only about two decent news pages available to New Zealanders to read. One is the BFD and the other is the political research pages, and they are the only ones giving you the actual hard cold facts. And JC of the BFD, I think it's a lady, but a very well informed lady, and this is what she wrote in part. Level 2 is more like level 3. This is having a negative effect on business, in particular those in the hospitality sector. 50 patrons per establishment is not an economic proposition. Truckers having to get tested weekly when they're on their own for most of their working day is a absolute nonsense. Butchers, garden centres and DIY stores, they should be open. Workers from the islands having to self-isolate for 7 days is absolutely ridiculous, even though not sufficient for the horticulture industry because we still have no backpackers. Then we have the rest of the country. Sitting around, the rest of the country sitting around waiting for products manufactured in Auckland. The industries concerned are now allowed to operate, but only after going through a process with the MBIE. A government that understood business would have anticipated weeks ago that this would happen. These are all imposition businesses don't need. In the current climate, common sense needs to prevail. And this nonsense of wearing masks is one of the biggest nonsense. And why I say that, if you wear glasses and you wear a mask, your glasses keep fogging up. And why do they keep fogging up? Because the bloody masks do not work, as all the overseas experts have been telling these clowns, like these clowns in New Zealand and silly old Biden and the rest of them, that they don't work. Quite honestly, the way that the health people have been given such a free hand by this crazy, silly little Prime Minister of ours, she hasn't kept them reined in. It may be because she doesn't know how to. She's absolutely inexperienced in business. She's absolutely inexperienced with anything except going to give some people a few hugs and just spend, and completely put a country like this into ruination. She is one of the very, very few leaders of any countries in the world now that is still pursuing this problem, this nonsense of isolating New Zealand from COVID-19, whatever strain it may be. She's going to have to wake up. The rest of us has woken up. Anyone who does even the tiniest amount of reading have woken up that this is a real false promise and a really stupid way to go. We're going to have to learn to live with COVID-19. And as far as this government goes, it couldn't run a bath, let alone run a country. In reply to that comment, there was a very, very good piece written by a correspondent called Wibble, and this is in part of what he or she wrote. And if you asked this government to run a bath, they would spend 3 years and at least $100 million on a series of reports concluding that the question was discriminatory against the disabled in the first place because, baths don't have legs, and so it is gross ableism to expect them to run. It would furthermore be determined by a very costly report that the question was also totally racist because the vast majority of baths are actually white. The subsequent Royal Commission report into the bath discrimination would come back with recommendations that at least 50% of all new baths must be the colour brown or black by the year 2030. Now you may think that that's a stupid statement, but this is how the mind of this crazy government and it is underlying caucuses which run, any other country, and in the past any government we've had one caucus made up by elected members of parliament, and you have the cabinet room. And we used to have people who were capable of holding those positions in the cabinet room. But today, what have we got? We've got this crazy Cindy. She has 3 caucuses. There is another group of people making up policy who don't answer to anybody, and silly little Cindy goes along and accepts this because she wants to stay nice with those bloody Greens. And why does she want to stay nice with these Greens? It's because she knows very, very well that even if there's an election tomorrow, she's out on her bloody ear, and the only way she could get back into the PM's office is by the support of the Greens. You know that. I know. Well, if you don't know that, you've not been reading anything, have you? You've just been reading the New Zealand Herald, and you've been listening to these radio stations that fire anybody, get rid of any talkback host or any host that happens to talk a bit of sense. The resource consent report required for filling the bath with water would be stalled for years while it was argued as to which iwi controlled the water rights and therefore to whom the water use fees would be paid. A separate lengthy report would then have to come, and they would be required to establish the time frame for changing the language used to describe bathing in general, and particularly for replacing the English word bath and tap with appropriate Maori word thingy thing. It will, of course, be essential that at least 50% of all bath users be Maori, and at any given time, and this requires non-Maori bathers to bring in a Maori representative to share the bath in order to achieve the quota, then that approval koha would have to be paid. Naturally, they will need to be assessment on the effect of bathing on our ability to meet the IPCC climate change objectives, and a plan to reduce accidental or deliberate methane and CO2 emission by any bathers whatsoever. The Bath Fencing Act would certainly would have to come into play, wouldn't it? Some further time to finalise will need both Health and Safety Act sign-offs and iwi consultations before it can be ratified. Naturally, the effect of COVID-19 will need to be incorporated somehow, and so bars will need to be a minimum of 2 metres long to separate bathers at either end of the bath, unless, of course, masks are to be mandatory. The bath fencing obviously will demonstrate a 2-metre minimum zone around the bars. If it's not possible to provide a minimum 2-metre bath length, then full PPE will be needed for all bathers whilst they are taking a bath. The government then announced that it is the first in the world to pass the new bath regulations, and bathing will be able to resume within 10 years. And Jacinda Ardern will present the report on the world-breaking bathing innovations to the next UN conference, and is likely to be a shoo-in for the Nobel Peace Prize. And you think that was tongue-in-cheek? Probably it is. But the sad part about it is that this is so close to the stupidity and just how idiotic this government is. It's scary, isn't it? Isn't it scary?